Hey folks, Pro Libertate, thanks again for watching. Here today, I wanted to talk again a bit about climate change, but a little broader than that. I wanted to get into just kind of a way to analyze propaganda. Before I get into that, I'm rocking my 3-0 Green Bay Packers shirt, so celebrating that today. Green Bay's doing good, like nice strong team. So I wanted to start off today by just kind of playing this video through. It's almost 3 minutes long, and then I'll go through again and pick it apart, so you can take it as a whole and then go back through and analyze it. So I'll just let this go.
Climate change protests happening right now in lower Manhattan. This is video from Chapter 4 showing the massive crowd marching from Foley Square near the courthouses down to the Battery. Among the people flooding city streets were students who were allowed to skip class today to join this cause. Also down there, activist Greta Thunberg, who recently sailed to Manhattan to drive home her points.
And this is so much bigger than just the New York protests. Take a look, part of a global call for action. There have been similar rallies happening all day long, all around the world, from New Jersey to Boston to even overseas in Paris. News 4's Jamie Roth live at the Battery. Jamie, what's it like out there now where you are?
Well, it's electric, actually, led by young people filling the streets, trying to raise awareness for climate change and get the attention of the adults in power. Tens of thousands marching down Broadway. On the ground, energy and conviction.
Our generation has been told time and time again that our lives do not matter and we have no historical purpose. We are out here today proving that wrong.
School kids led the charge, walking out of class, demanding world leaders take action to prevent further global warming and climate change.
We are witnessing the destruction of our planet. I feel powerful knowing that I am on the right side of history.
13-year-old New Yorker Marisol Rivera addressed the masses at the start of the march.
We're going to be the ones who are getting affected because we're going to inherit this world.
New York City climate strikers demanding fossil fuels stay in the ground, demanding a transition to renewable energy and accountability for polluters. Also aiming pressure at the UN ahead of next week's Climate Action Summit.
I want the UN to hear that as much as I respect what they're doing, I feel like they're not doing enough. I feel like none of us are really doing enough in terms of encouraging and pushing forward direct legislation that's going to help protect our environment. And I think that that's what the UN needs to be encouraging.
Marchers traveled from Foley Square to Battery Park, where speakers drove home the themes of the day.
I want to encourage all of us to approach the climate crisis with the moral clarity of children.
Adults in this crowd, including New York City Council Speaker Corey Johnson, say they are listening.
I'm sort of at a loss for words, and I have goosebumps because I have never seen this many people at a march in New York City before.
Really?
So the march ends here at Battery Park, and one of the highlights of this portion will be hearing from 16-year-old Greta Thunberg, the Swedish teen who would skip school on Fridays to protest climate change in front of the Swedish parliament. Her movement inspiring this one here today. Reporting live from Battery Park, Jamie Roth, News 4, New York.
Thank you for watching this video from NBC4 New York. You can subscribe.
Wow. Okay. There's a lot in there. A lot of absurdity in there. And I chose this video in particular because it's not necessarily, the big national nightly news kind of thing. This is your standard local New York news, right? So let's back it up. There's a lot in there to address. And really I want to look at this from a propaganda perspective. How does propaganda work? How to analyze what you're being fed. Okay? There's a reason why television shows were called programs, right? They're meant to program you. They're supposed to give you a sense of reality. This is how the world is around you. That's why they're called programs. And with the thickest programming is the nightly news, and especially those national news, national nightly news shows, NBC, ABC, CBS, all that stuff. It's all the propaganda is thick, and let's just chop through this a bit. There was a lot in there. So
Protests happening right now in lower Manhattan. This is video from...
Give us this image of a street just full of people, okay? I don't know what that's from. I mean, it could be this climate rally. Maybe it probably is. I don't know. Just saying, though. Thousands. How many thousands, right? They don't give us a direct number. and just see this sea of people. How much coverage did the pro-life rally get? Right, there was literally, I forget how many people were there. I think it was like 1 million people in Washington for the pro-life rally earlier this year. Just a massive amount of people. Got next to zero coverage. So the fact that this is even on the nightly news is part of the propaganda narrative. They choose what is relevant. They choose which rallies are going to be covered by the news. They choose what is newsworthy. These are things to remember. You always have to ask yourself, why is this on the news and this other stuff is not? Okay? They choose what the narrative is going to be. And so this they deem to be newsworthy. Well, let's go on.
Chapter 4, showing the massive crowd marching from Foley Square near the courthouses down to the Battery. Among the people flooding city streets were students who were allowed to skip class today.
Bam, right there. So notice his emphasis on the word massive. Massive crowd. Okay? So again, they're emphasizing the size of the crowd, and that's coming again here as they show people across the country and across the world all in this together to pressure the governments to act on climate change, right? But another key little phrase in there was students were allowed to skip school for this. I can't remember being allowed to skip school for anything. And they mention it later on with this Greta Thunberg girl at the end, that she skipped school every Friday to go protest climate change. So the schools are obviously sanctioning this nonsense. So this is part of the education of the mind in the brave new world. Okay? As long as you're out, I mean, would they be allowed to skip school to go to Trump rallies? Right? If Trump was holding a rally in New York, would the students be allowed to skip school for that? I doubt it. Would they be allowed to skip school to go to a Tea Party rally or whatever? No. Okay? But when it's these approved causes, it's okay. So the students were allowed to skip school for this, just like they were allowed to skip school to go protest the Second Amendment a few years ago, right? When that David Hogg and all those people were making their rounds on TV and calling, So there's all these children's crusades now. I'll get to that in a bit. Or children are used as props by the left to push their agenda, right? Because you can't criticize kids. How are you going to criticize a 15-year-old kid? I mean, you just look like a bully. And that's the point. It's the optics of it. But let's just go on. So just note that. These kids were allowed to skip school.
To join this cause. Also down there, activist Greta Thunberg, who recently sailed to Manhattan to drive home her points.
And this is so much bigger than just the New York protests. Take a look, part of a global call for action. There have been similar rallies happening all day long, all around the world, from New Jersey to Boston to even overseas in Paris.
So, again, the image is the size, so it's trying to convey that this is a huge movement. There's a lot of people worried about this. And action must be taken. This is all part of the propaganda to put pressure on the state and even people like myself that are skeptical, that it's trying to give the impression that guys like me are in the minority, okay? Guys like me who doubt this stuff and think that these kids are being used as tools and pawns in a bigger game, we're in the minority. That's the intention of the, whenever media shows large crowds like this. It's to give an impression of the majority, right? We all have a very democratic mindset that, the majority should dictate the way a country is, the direction of the government in a country, right? And so the way to steer public opinion then is to give an impression that a majority supports something. And the way you do that is through images like this, okay? So it's a fake majority that they're trying to portray here. They do this garbage all the time. Don't fall for it. It's a trick of the left.
News 4's Jamie Roth live at the Battery. Jamie, what's it like out there now where you are?
Well, it's electric, actually.
It's electric. It's electric. There's a bunch of kids just milling around behind her, okay? And they use that word a couple of times. Like, there's so much energy. We're excited, okay? Let's continue.
Led by young people filling the streets, trying to raise awareness for climate change.
Led by young people. That's a lie, okay? Who paid for the stage? Who paid for the microphones? Who paid for the person you're about to see doing sign language out there? Who paid for all this stuff? It wasn't these high school kids, okay? So that's a lie. This is not led by young people. It's a farce. The young people are props in a bigger game. They're really being exploited here. Okay, let's just continue.
And get the attention of the adults in power.
Get the attention of the adults.
Tens of thousands marching down Broadway. On the ground, energy and conviction.
Our generation has been told time and time again that our lives do not matter and we have no historical purpose. We are out here today.
Who's saying that to people? Your lives don't matter and you have no historical purpose. I've never heard anybody say anything like that to an upcoming generation. Nobody said it to me when I was young. Nobody said to me, hey, just so you know, your generation doesn't matter. Let that sink in, buddy. You know, that's never happened in my life. It would be astounding if it happened in this guy's life. It's just made up. Who's saying your life doesn't matter? It's insane. It's just so bizarre, these talking points that they utter. They live in just this made-up reality. Anyway, let's continue.
Today, proving that wrong.
School kids led the charge, walking.
Could have saved us. So they think they're all doomed and they're all dead. Okay? And let's
out of class, demanding world leaders take action to prevent further global warming and climate change.
We are witnessing the destruction of our planet. I feel powerful knowing that I am on the right side of history.
13-year.
Okay. We are rich. I mean, if you're going to use a kid as a prop, then I have the right to criticize what the person's saying. Okay? I don't care how old they are. If they're up there pushing ideas that are going to affect the entire world, then I have a right to criticize it. I mean, I know they're trying to use these kids as human shields, basically. But what they're saying needs to be criticized. I feel like I'm on the right side of history. Well, if you're correct, you are. Right? If what you're saying is true, you are. If what you're saying is totally false, you're just a pawn. You're just a dupe. You've been duped. Okay? So obviously this girl's reading, from a piece of paper or something. You got the person over here doing the sign language. There's, so this is not led by kids. The kids are being used as props. Okay?
Year-old New Yorker Marisol Rivera addressed the masses at the start of the march.
We're going to be the ones who are getting affected because we're going to inherit this world.
New York City climate strikers demanding
Yeah, we're the ones who are going to be affected, okay? So there's this narrative for these kids that they're inheriting this horrible world, and the world's going to end. I mean, you hear it in a minute here where some kid says we got
fossil fuels stay in the ground, demanding
fossil fuels stay in the ground, okay? Fossil fuels need to stay in the ground. All right. So just look around here. The clothing that they're wearing, the cameras that are being used, the signs that are made, all that stuff's made possible because of fossil fuels. All right? Cameras probably, 90% plastic, again, made possible by fossil fuels. The signs, the printing that powered the printers that printed the signs, that powered the flag back there, that powered the looms that sewed the flag together back there, the clothes that they're wearing, all made possible by fossil fuels and power plants. And fossil fuels need to stay in the ground, though. How did these people get over here anyway? Right? I bet they all walked, right? Okay.
A transition to renewable energy and accountability for polluters. Also aiming pressure at the UN ahead of next week's Climate Action Summit.
I want the UN to hear that as much as I respect what they're doing, I feel like they're not doing enough. I feel like none of us are really doing enough in terms of encouraging and pushing forward direct legislation that's going to help protect our environment. And I think that that's what the UN needs to be encouraging.
Marchers traveled from Foley Square to Battery Park, where speakers drove home the themes of the day.
I want to encourage all of us to approach the climate crisis with the moral clarity of children.
Adults in this crowd.
The moral clarity of children. What a line. What a line. The moral clarity of children. My goodness. What moral clarity? Children are just, especially, at this age, they're just figuring out, where they stand in the world. I mean, you can go through all like the developmental psychologists. They'll tell you that it's not until you're much older that you start having actual moral clarity. Say what you will about them. I'm just throwing that out there, though. The moral clarity of children. That really is kind of a giveaway of what they're trying to achieve with the optics, right? And it's, again, they're props. They're being used as props, and that's exploitation, right? This happens time and time again with these lefty causes, where children are used as props and human shields. I remember reading about the old unions, when unions were first forming here in the United States. The way big business would deal with employees that would try to unionize would be you just fire them all, right? Well, then what do you do if the workers chain themselves to the factory machinery, right? Well, then you got to send in some muscle to drag them out of the factory, right? And the optics of that didn't garner as much sympathy. And so what some of these strikers started to do was to bring their kids to the protests, so that the optics of, kids getting in the way in the middle of a fight between unions and the factory owners' security, the optics of that are pretty bad. And so that's what pushed the state to support unions, right? And it's the same sort of thing here. What kind of person is going to be criticizing kids, right? So that's the optics that we're trying to achieve. This youthful innocence, moral clarity of children. Gosh, it's just so idiotic, right? Kids are still learning to make their beds, right? They're in no position to be dictating policy for the world. It's just so absurd. It's so absurd. Let's continue.
Including New York City Council Speaker Corey Johnson say they are listening.
I'm sort of at a loss for words, and I have goosebumps because I have never seen this many people at a march in New York City before.
Wow.
So the march ends here at Battery Park, and one of the highlights of this portion will be hearing from 16-year-old Greta Thunberg, the Swedish teen who would skip school on Fridays to protest climate change in front of the Swedish parliament. Her movement inspiring this one here today. Reporting live from Battery Park, Jamie Roth, News 4, New York.
Thank you for watching this video.
All right. So again, she gets to skip school every Friday to go and protest for, climate change, right? Again, who else, what other movement would be allowed to do such a thing, right? Would students be allowed to skip school Friday to go, support the NRA? Would students be allowed to skip school once a week, to go and protest the local Planned Parenthood, right? Would students be allowed to skip school on Friday, to, do activities at church? To go and support their local church? No, of course not. Those would all be deemed truancies and unapproved. But if you're on the right side of history, as the one, capably speaking girl stated, then it's okay. And And again, the emphasis on the size of the crowds. This is one of the, gimmicks of the media that, Trump, say what you will about Trump, it's one of the things that he's done such a good job at shattering. One of the great moments in Trump's campaign for presidency was when he just pointed out how bogus the media was, and how Trump would have these rallies, and he was selling out arenas and small stadiums and stuff like that, and the mainstream media would never disclose the real number of how many people were there. And so when they would show the crowd, it would always be a slice of the crowd. They didn't want to show how big it really was. And at one of the rallies, Trump called the media out. He's like, turn those cameras around. Show them how many people really are here. And, because they didn't want to be shamed, the cameramen dutifully obeyed, and the crowd was massive. It looked like there was probably like 20, 30,000 people at this arena that Trump was speaking in. Just a massive crowd. Again, they didn't want to convey that there was a lot of people in support of Trump. Okay? Whereas the opposite is the case here. Here, we want to show a bigger crowd. Here, we want to act like it's this global thing that's going on all over the place, right? And I'm not saying it's not, but I'm just saying, I'm talking about the inconsistency in reporting. Okay? So that's what I'm addressing there. But moving on, this again reflects the Brave New World education, the Brave New World aspect, or the Orwellian aspect of education, and as I said, the exploitation of children. And I wanted to pull up this quote by Orwell, and this quotation on Crime Stop I found to be one of the most insightful things that Orwell wrote about, and really about thought crime and stopping certain thoughts from being embarked upon. So Orwell states, "Crime Stop means the faculty of stopping short, as though by instinct, at the threshold of any dangerous thought. It includes the power of not grasping analogies, of failing to perceive logical errors, of misunderstanding the simplest arguments if they are inimical to Ingsoc, it's English socialism, and of being bored or repelled by any train of thought which is capable of leading in a heretical direction. Crime Stop, in short, means protective stupidity." End quotation. I found that to be one of the most insightful things that Orwell wrote. It really captures the kind of citizen that is demanded in the world of Oceania, or of Ingsoc, under the rule of Ingsoc. These are the kind of citizens that, and these are the kind of minds that I would dare say the public education is driving people towards. The fact that these schools would allow the students to skip out to go and do this shows that this is what they want them to do. They're grooming activists in public schools now. All right? So they're grooming left-wing activists in public schools. Why on earth are people, Christians, or people who are just somewhere on the right, having their kids in these schools? Send your kids to a private school where you know what they're being taught, you know it's good stuff, or homeschool them, where you have direct control over these things. Even more direct control, I should say. I for the life of me can't understand why, when you see, this kind of nonsense with the kids, romping around, with a bunch of left-wing lunatics, as part of their education, why would anybody to the right of John McCain send their kids there? It doesn't make any sense. These are the citizens. These are the minds that are being groomed by public education right now. And so I would strongly impress upon anybody watching, please don't do this to your kids. Don't let them be props for these clowns. And granted, parents can exercise a bit of protection even when your children are in the government school system. But my goodness, there's a great way to avoid all of this. It's called private school. It's called homeschooling, right? It's called classical education, right? Instead of their minds being full of nonsense about the world ending in 11 years, how about you fill them with good things? How about you fill their minds with the works of Shakespeare or Tolkien, Beowulf, or Latin, logic, right? Stories of Narnia, good stories. How about you fill their heads with the actual science, actual philosophy of science, how science is supposed to work, right? Maybe they won't fall for the notion that there's a consensus. Science has spoken. Science has never spoken. Science is always in a state of flux. We have a theory, and it explains a number of things, but over time there's enough anomalies, and that theory has to be replaced or modified. Science is always in flux. Science has never spoken. Science has never. Science never arrives at truth. This is one of the things people need to understand. Science does not give us truth. It's an approximation of how things work, right? I mean, just take, again, simple things like the theory of gravity, right? We don't even know what gravity is. We don't even know what gravity is. We don't even know what light is. Is it a wave? Is it a particle? I mean, gravity, we just say, it's a force. Okay, well, what does that mean? What is it? Okay? We can describe how it works, but we don't know what it is. We don't know what the thing is. Okay? The same thing with light. Is light a particle or is it a wave? Well, it's kind of both. What? Okay? We don't know. Science is really in need of a deep humbling. It needs a hefty serving of humble pie. Right? Scientists have become the new priests, blah, blah, blah. They even wear a priestly garment. They got their robe on, the little lab coat, letting you know that they're an expert. And, but the propaganda isn't just for kids. I mean, I remember, I've said in a previous video how they were really pushing it when I was a kid in government school, unfortunately. I mean, it seemed like an endless education in recycling, in endangered species, in deforestation, and global warming, right? They really, and how bad industry and fossil fuels are. I mean, there's a reason they go after kids. It's indoctrination. There's a reason why probably the most objectionable cabinet appointment in the Trump administration was Betsy DeVos. There were howls over Betsy DeVos. The only person who probably topped her as far as Trump's appointments was Kavanaugh. As far as how much heat was given from the left and these activists, it was Betsy DeVos. She was the one that they pushed back the hardest against, and it's because she was for a right to pick which school your children go to, right? It's the school vouchers. So if you don't want your kid to go to some crummy public school, right, the one that's assigned to you, you can use a voucher and send them to a private school. And a voucher, from what I understand, it's like a coupon, that you can use to pay for the child's education elsewhere, right? So the money that the public school would have gotten, it's now going to go to this private school. And of course, the teachers' unions howl against this, and the leftists howl against that, because here's the rub: they want your kids. They want them in there, and they want to turn them into that. They want to turn them into hacks and activists holding signs, thinking that they're going to save the world. Let's save it. It's the only Earth we have. Let's save it. Okay? They want to turn your kid into that. You're just running around holding a sign in the streets. Okay? So that's what they want to do. And so that's why Betsy DeVos was pushed back against so hard. Because by doing a school voucher program, it kind of circumvents this stuff right there. And they don't want it. They know it. This is the thing. The people on the right don't quite understand how important education is. The left understands it. That's why the communists infiltrated the universities. That's why they went after those positions. Right? On the right, we're concerned about fairness. We're concerned about, facts, logic, and reason. Lefties don't care about that stuff. What they care about is, like the young girl said, that they're on the right side of history. Okay? So, but it's not just the children. There's, I mean, they started with children, but I had a picture here of good old Bill Nye. This is propaganda for adults now, or people my age, because I grew up with this guy. Thought his show was great. I mean, I love science, right? Wanted to be an astronaut when I was a kid, all these sorts of things. Boys, in general, love science. We love figuring out how things work. We love figuring out how to put things together, chemical reactions, these sorts of things. We love those things, all right? Just in general, broadly speaking. And, most of my friends growing up, we loved Bill Nye. And there was another guy, Mr. Wizard. It was a similar sort of show. I remember watching those shows and just thoroughly enjoying them. That was before Bill Nye became, just a flaming propagandist, which is what he is now. And so he was on some stupid show, one of those late night shows that kind of pose like they're Johnny Carson now, but they're all hacks now too. So he was on one of these shows, and I'm not going to play the video because it's kind of obscene, honestly. And in the video, Bill Nye sets the globe on fire. He has this desk, as you can see here, with various instruments, and he sets the globe on fire to show this is what's happening to the planet right now because of climate change. And as the globe's on fire and he uses the fire extinguisher eventually, he's just dropping the F word left and right. Like, this is an argument, right? Look how cool he is. Look how cool Bill Nye is now. He says the F-bomb, right? He can swear. Man, he's so cool. No, he's a moron. I was just so, I shouldn't say surprised or shocked because it really shouldn't be. But it's just kind of like one of those, oh, really? Facepalm kind of moments when I saw people, referring to this Bill Nye video, like, wow, that was so cool. That was so good. He showed them. Like, showed us what? That he doesn't have an argument? That there's no actual argument that that can be made? There's no actual discussion over these things? It's just, wake the blank up, and we need to save the world. Again, we got like 12 years or something. It's just so absurd. So absurd. But it works on people. I don't get it. The globe's literally on fire. I mean, again, in one of my previous videos, I went through just a slice of the failed predictions these guys have made. Just a slice. How many times can they be wrong before we start to question and doubt the theory? How many times do they make failed predictions about ice caps being melted by such and such date? This part of a city being underwater by such and such a date. Famines by this date. Water rations by this date. How many times do they make those kind of predictions and are wrong before we say, I kind of think you guys just don't know what you're talking about? And a lot of this just has the smell of Marxism and propaganda to it, posing as science. You know, what do they always say? That there's a scientific consensus, right? As though science works by democracy. It's not how science works. It's not how it's supposed to work. And there's ways to achieve a consensus, by the way, that are unscientific. You just don't publish in peer-reviewed journals the guys who are heretics. You don't publish the guys who are saying, yeah, actually, I kind of doubt this whole climate change narrative you guys got, and I'm a scientist, I'm a climatologist, and, you know, based on my research, I don't see the polar ice caps being melted anytime soon. Flush. That's what happens to a guy who writes a paper like that. Doesn't matter his credentials, doesn't matter what's his peer-reviewed, or it doesn't matter the strength of the paper and the research he's done. It will not get published in a peer-reviewed journal. Okay? And that's how you create a consensus. You flush the stuff that's outside the narrative. Okay? That's not how science is supposed to work. Science isn't supposed to work on consensus. We don't vote on what the scientific truth is. We follow the facts, we follow the research, we follow the experiments, and we form theories based upon those things. We don't vote on which theory is best. It's just so insane. But again, this comes back to a basic philosophy of science. This is where philosophy is so important in understanding how things are supposed to work. It's a meta narrative look at how these things are supposed to work. How is science supposed to work? Well, you don't ask a scientist. You ask a philosopher. Philosophers are the ones who sit back and are like, okay, so how do we distinguish between science and non-science? Let's make some objective hallmarks of science that exclude things like astrology, that exclude things, like alchemy or whatever, right? That exclude things, that are unscientific, right? So how do you exclude astrology from being science? Because there's astrologers who'd like to say that they're very scientific, or even some of the really goofy chiropractic stuff, right? I'm not against chiropractic work or anything like that. I'm just saying, if you read some of like the old arguments made by chiropractors and people who are deep into that, they think that everything can be cured through spinal adjustments. They really think that. So how do you exclude that as being science, right? You have to have objective standards. Anyway, kind of wandering off here, but the main point I really wanted to get at is that these children are being used as props, and they're being propagandized to through really an unscientific theory. There's nothing scientific about this doomsday narrative. I was listening to Rush Limbaugh earlier, and he had this little montage. It was just great, of people at one of these climate rallies, and it's these kids, and they're just saying the most outlandish and absurd things. And some kid was up saying, we got 11 years until the changes are irrevocable. I'm like, what? Says who? I mean, how can you know that? I mean, again, they've been wrong so many times, but these people are really afraid. Or some other kids shouting, rebel! And so these kids have been made into activists, and they're all high school kids. Again, the way propaganda works too, like this Greta Thunberg, who sailed the Atlantic. I mean, she's all over, the news networks right now. Faces everywhere. She's this Trevor Noah guy. She's on everything right now. And it's just kind of odd to me. I mean, she's just kind of got an odd look about her. I mean, she's 16 years old, but she doesn't look like she's 16. I mean, I see pictures of her. She looks like she's like 9. I mean, look at her here. Right? She looks to me like she's like 9 or 10 years old. just, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm missing something. But she just, and you know, I think that's important. They got somebody who looks younger than she probably really is. And again, that's intentional. It's part of the propaganda. Like the lady said, what did she say again? The moral clarity of children. So, anyway, the main point, children are being used as props. They're being groomed into being activists in the public schools. Get your kids out. Get them out. And also the science is pretty flimsy around this stuff. I mean, you got freaking Bill Nye setting globes on fire as an argument. Not an argument. Logic and facts have gone out the window with this. Okay? And like Orwell said, you know, with Crime Stop, the failure to perceive logical fallacies, right? Misunderstanding the simplest arguments. That's what's being groomed in these public schools. They don't want why don't public schools teach logic, right? I mean, you know, it's like a add-on class before somebody is like, well, actually my public school taught logic, okay? Well, it's not part of a core curriculum. Why not? Okay? There's a reason for that. They're wanting to groom people who basically can't think. They want them to be protectively stupid. Well, thanks again for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this. And take care.